Welcome back, everybody. If you had to choose between saving your own child and saving two children that you had never met before, what would you choose? Most people would save their own child. But what if it were between your own child and 100 children that were not related to you? Is drinking $5 lattes from Starbucks immoral? What if you made the coffee at home and used the savings to help out really needy people in impoverished parts of the world? If there were an experience machine that you could program to have any sort of experience that you wanted, would it be morally okay to plug yourself into this virtual reality for the rest of your life? If we could guarantee world peace, the eradication of poverty, universal health care, universal basic income, but it would require the sacrifice of one innocent child, would it be worth it? These are the sorts of questions that we're going to address today. And we're going to get the help of a moral philosophy called utilitarianism. Let's get started. So we're going to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of utilitarianism today. And we're going to use thought experiments to help us out. We're going to start with a thought experiment from an Australian philosopher, Peter Singer. And this thought experiment we're actually going to use to show one of the advantages of utilitarianism. So here's the thought experiment. It comes in two parts. The first part we'll call the pawn case. It goes like this. You're on your way to an important job interview, and you're wearing a very expensive pair of shoes. On your way, you come across a small child drowning in a pond. You're the only person around who can hear the child's cries for help. You do not have time to get help. You could wade into the pond and easily save the child, but if you do so, you will ruin your new pair of very expensive shoes and be late for a very important meeting. What's the right thing to do? Most people will wade into the pond and save the child. Yeah, you'll ruin your shoes. Yes, you'll be late for the meeting, but hey, it's a child's life on the line. Here's part 2 of the thought experiment. We'll call this the Oxfam letter. In the mail today, you receive a letter from Oxfam, a very reputable organization committed to aiding impoverished children in the developing world, which asks you to please donate $10 to their relief efforts. The letter informs you that you have about 3 million children each day that die from dehydrating diarrhea. But for every $3 that Oxfam receives, they will be able to save one child's life by sending him or her a packet of oral rehydration salts. So by sending $10 to Oxfam, you will be able to prevent at least 3 children from dying soon. Now, we come across these invitations for charity all the time. In another lecture, I gave an example of you're checking out at the grocery store and you have the option of just pushing a button and it will add to your total of your debit or credit card. It's a very convenient way to help needy people out. But more often than not, most of us hit the not today button. So why is it morally required of us to save one child, even if it meant that we would ruin an expensive pair of shoes? We would incur a cost of $100, $200, $300. But it's also okay to pass on spending $10 that would save at least 3 children. That seems morally inconsistent. Now, a lot of people will say, well, hey, the child that's drowning in the pond, they're right there. We can hear them screaming. And the children that the $10 would go toward, they're on the other side of the planet. We don't even get to see them face to face. So that's a proximity argument. And someone like Peter Singer, he would argue that the distance is morally irrelevant. I mean, think about it from the child on the other side of the world's perspective. They might say, that's why I'm going to die needlessly of this random disease? Because you just happen to be the wrong amount of miles away? That doesn't seem very fair to them. Peter Singer advocates for some form of utilitarianism. He thinks that we should have more utilitarian motives, and we should spend much more of our dispensable and disposable income and time to help people who are less fortunate than us. So this two-part thought experiment shows us an advantage of utilitarianism. So if you are a big charity person, then utilitarianism might be for you, because if it's the correct moral theory, then presumably many of us would have to spend more time and give more of our resources to needy people. And if you think that yes, we should, then this theory can back up that sort of thinking. Another advantage of utilitarianism is that it's quite simple. You could explain it essentially to a 5-year-old. When we looked at some of the other moral theories in this course, they get quite complicated. Kantian ethics almost takes 1 or 2 college-level lectures to fully explain. So there is a common sense to utilitarianism that is quite nice. It seems to be empirically grounded. Like Bentham and Mill point out, we do naturally, psychologically, seem compelled to want pleasure and happiness, and we naturally avoid pain and suffering. So if our moral philosophy is tied into our natural disposition, all the better. If you're a pro-animal rights person, then this might be the moral view for you. Because when we act, when we're at a moral decision point, we're not just trying to do what's best for us. That would be egoism. When we said utilitarianism isn't egoism. You have to factor in how your action impacts all those affected. And remember, who or what counts as a one are sentient beings. So that's human beings, but that's all other living creatures who can experience pain and pleasure. So that's our cats, our dogs, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, some fish perhaps. And so if you think we need to factor in animal suffering in our moral decision making, then this theory can back that up. And finally, there is inequality that's at the heart of utilitarianism. Everyone's happiness, other things being equal, is weighted equally. It doesn't matter if you are royalty, if you are king, or if you are someone living on the streets. Your happiness is human happiness, so it's weighted the same. So those are some of the things that utilitarianism has going for it. And you might think, great, we don't need to finish the rest of this course. We've got our moral theory, we defended it, end of story. Well, philosophers who are critical of this moral view, they've presented lots and lots of really fascinating thought experiments that serve as challenges and objections and problem cases for this moral framework. So let's go through some of these. We already looked at the trolley problem, the Fat Man version, and the sidetrack case. Let's look at this case. We'll call it the Better Call Saul case. So in what I think is the pilot episode of this Breaking Bad spinoff, Better Call Saul, the lead character, Saul, he's a defense attorney, and his job is to defend these 3 teenagers, these 3 19-year-olds, I think it is, for their alleged crime. So what did they do? Well, they defiled a corpse, essentially. They went to the morgue, and they were messing around with one of the dead bodies. I mean, did despicable things to it, like decapitated it and maybe even sexually defiled it.
This is not all there yet. If we were all held responsible for what we did when we were 19. I remember what it was like to be a kid. Think back. Tell him, Judge, what would you say? These boys, 19. I don't. He used to be a young man. Just like you. Oh, to be 19 again. You with me, ladies and gentlemen? Do you remember 19? Let me tell you, the juices are flowing. The red corpuscles are corpuscling. The grass is green and it's soft, and summer's gonna last forever. Now, do you remember? Yeah, you do. But if you're being honest, really honest, you'll recall that you also had an underdeveloped 19-year-old brain. Me personally, if I were held accountable for some of the stupid decisions I made when I was 19, oh boy, wow. And I bet if we were in church right now, I'd get a big amen. Which brings us to these three. Now, these three knuckleheads, and I'm sorry, boys, but that's what you are. They did a dumb thing. We're not denying that. However, I would like you to remember two salient facts. Fact one, nobody got hurt. Not a soul. Very important to keep that in mind. Fact two, now the prosecution keeps bandying this term, criminal trespass. Mr. Spinazzo, the property owner, admitted to us that he keeps most portions of his business open to the public both day and night. So, trespassing, it's a bit of a reach, don't you think, Dave? Here's what I know. These three young men, near honors students all, were feeling their oats one Saturday night, and they just went a little bananas. I don't know, call me crazy, but I don't think they deserve to have their bright futures ruined by a momentary, minute, never to be repeated lapse of judgment. Ladies and gentlemen, you're bigger than that.
Kenny, are you rolling?
Yeah, wait a minute. Yeah, baby, yeah!
Down, chill out, would you? Hey, Miss Watson's fourth period biology class. This one's for you. Watch and learn, losers.
Oh, yeah!
Oh, God. Where'd all the blood go? He's dead. They suck it all out, dumbass.
Awesome. Where did they put it?
All right, I'm through the net phone now, dude.
Oh, no.
Kenny, get over here, man.
I'm getting it.
Shut it. All right,
Let me do it. I got it.
All right. Get this. All right.
Oh, my God.
Let me do it. Get off. Chill out. All right. Wait. Okay, wait for it. Wait.
Come on, yeah, baby, yeah! I dare you to stick your wang in the throat hole.
I will if you will, loser. All right.
Now, most of us get grossed out by that, and we think, there's something not quite right about that. However, if you are a utilitarian, you only have to factor in sentient beings in your moral decision making. And since dead bodies, corpses, are not sentient, a dead body can't experience pain anymore, then it's hard to come up with a utilitarian reason for why this is immoral. So if you think defiling corpses, desecrating human remains is immoral, then you might not want to be a utilitarian, because it seems like someone like Miller Bentham would be forced to say that this is at best morally neutral. Certainly doesn't seem to be morally wrong. So the adage, no harm, no foul, rings true for the utilitarian. If there's no harm, if there's no pain or suffering, then who are we to say that something was wrong? But on the other hand, most of us say, no, there was still some sort of maybe rights violation. Maybe not of the person who's dead, but maybe of their memory, or maybe to the loved ones that are attached to that person. Okay, let's go on to another case. We'll call this the do intentions count for nothing case. Or actually, this is going to have two parts, too. Imagine that there is a sniper on the roof of a building. Maybe at the roof of a college. And suppose that the Pope, the leader of the Roman Catholic Church, is visiting the college. And this sniper, for whatever reason, let's say they had malice in their heart, maybe just had too many nuns whacking them with rulers in their childhood. This person wants to take out the Pope, wants to murder the Pope. And so the sniper puts the Pope in his scope, the little crosshairs right on maybe that kind of interesting looking Pope hat, pulls the trigger, but misses the head of the Pope. Maybe the bullet goes right through the top of the hat, not hitting the head. And the Pope lives, and everyone screams and scatters. Now, this is where the story becomes a tall tale, becomes fantastical. So, I'm really reaching here, but just bear with me. The bullet hits the ground and chips away some of the asphalt or whatever's on the ground. And there's like a little crack that turns into a small chasm. And then maybe there's like a sinkhole there. And there's like a mini earthquake. And then this black liquid starts bubbling up from the surface, and all of a sudden there's this geyser of this black stuff, and it's oil. So they're right below the middle of our quad in our campus. Let's say there was undiscovered oil, and it is it's shooting up for us to collect and to sell on the market. And as a result, let's say there are all these wonderful consequences. Tuition is waived for all students. Faculty get raises. Everyone gets a parking spot. Free food on campus. And it's not just normal dining common or cafeteria food. We pay for the best restaurants that students love on campus, and all that's free. And everyone gets a car, like an Oprah thing, everyone gets a free car who enrolls in classes. Free Tesla or something, or whatever your dream car is, because we have all this oil money. Now, even though there were really good consequences that came from this seemingly wicked action, most of us still want to say that what the sniper did was wrong. They attempted to kill someone, and killed someone who's very important to someone that's supposed to be one of the moral leaders of the world. So our intuition for many of us is that there was still something wrong about what the sniper did. However, if we're strict utilitarians, remember, we're only allowed to judge actions based on their consequences. And so since not only were there no bad consequences, there were only good consequences. And we don't really have the leg to stand on in morally criticizing the sniper. And we almost are forced to applaud him and say, thank you, sniper. We have to give that person an award instead of maybe punishing them or putting them in jail. So, because we're not allowed to factor in intentions, this theory maybe is a bit too extreme. So maybe consequences are important and should be factored into moral decision making, but do we really want to completely discount intentionality? It's not exactly clear. So we might need to tweak utilitarianism to factor in what people try to do, people's intentions. And if you remember back to the principle of utility that we looked at, this modern version, it's not quite what Mill and Bentham wrote word for word, but captures the heart of their idea. We actually do this with the word expected. So we could have written this principle without this word expected, and then it really doesn't take into account any intentionality what people tried to do. But if we put in expected, then we're capturing intentions, what we expect to happen. What did the sniper expect to happen? Did they expect the college to get rich and to distribute the proceeds of selling the oil to all the student, staff, and faculty? No, what they expected was to kill the leader of the Roman Catholic Church. So that might be one way to get around this problem. And that's what's kind of neat about these challenges to utilitarianism. It's not like we need all of them to be successful for the critique to be potent, to have gusto. We really just need one of them to be quite strong, and it doesn't matter if the other ones fall flat. So even if this one falls flat in the end, the utilitarians still will have to address each criticism one by one. So now let's look at part 2 of this case. So it'll be the reverse. Instead of someone having bad intentions and good consequences ensuing, we're going to have someone that has good intentions and the consequences won't be so good. So in this case, there is someone who really wants to eradicate the diseases that are affecting very poor parts of the world. So let's say it's an American doctor who is an expert in diseases that affect poorer parts of the world, and they travel to these other countries and they live among the people and maybe these villages, and they get to know them and take blood samples, and they're in the lab over there, and they toil for like 5 or 10 years. And it would be bad enough if they make no progress after 5 or 10 years. They're not one step closer to making even one kid or adult over there healthier, and the diseases are still just as widespread. But we'll put this little tweak on the story. Suppose this doctor carries over to these poorer countries a disease that had not been introduced to that community before. So remember in your world history, when Europeans traveled to the New World, there was a lot of violence and overpowering and taking by force of land, and that caused a lot of deaths. But then a lot of the deaths were just from the diseases that came from Europe to North America that had never been there before, and that wiped out a lot of the population that was here. And so let's say something like that happened with this doctor. So again, they had the best, their heart was a heart of gold, they had the best of intentions, yet the consequences, they weren't even neutral. They made things worse. They actually, inadvertently killed more people over there. Now, even though there was more death that came from their research trip, many of us want to say we still want to applaud this person for their efforts. They still tried, and that means something. But if you're a strict utilitarian and you don't look at intention at all, then we're forced to morally thumbs down this person's behavior because we judge it in terms of the consequences, and what they did just led to more death and pain and suffering. But that seems kind of funny to say that. So if you are a Kantian, if you think we should judge actions based on their intentions, then we get the right answer in both these cases. We get to morally criticize the sniper, and we get to morally applaud the doctor researcher. And that's what most people want to do. Now, I keep saying how most people will react, and that's not the be-all, end-all of morality. You don't just want morality to consist in what the population says should be done. You don't just want to put it to a democratic vote, because the masses can be duped and they are not infallible and they can be wrong. I mean, if we put slavery to a vote, today we might be okay, but if you go back not too distant past, if you go back 50, 100, 300 years, most people might be okay with slavery. Probably not the slaves, but if you polled everyone, it might get the moral okay. And that would be an example where most people can get it wrong. So while most people are fallible and they are not infallible, still often it's a good litmus test. It's a good first pass, let's say, at discovering the moral truth or the moral reality, if there is such a thing. So look at this character here. This is that little foundling. This is Grogu from that Mandalorian series, and of course he is the same species as Yoda. And if you remember that line in, I think it is in Empire Strikes Back, Yoda says, "Do or do not, there is no try." So this would ring true for the utilitarian. And remember, utilitarianism is a form of consequentialism because of the focus on outcomes and consequences. So Luke, he's going to bail on his training. He's going to go fight. Well, he really wants to save his friends. And Yoda's like, hold on. You haven't finished your training yet. You're not ready. And Luke says, well, I don't care. I got to go save my friends. And so, something about his loyalty to his friends that we want to applaud. And Yoda says, okay, this is on you. And Luke says something like, I'm going to go try my best. And Yoda's like, listen, the fate of the galaxy is on the line here. You either succeed or you don't. There's none of this try business. You do it or you do not. Try. What is try? So that's utilitarian would very much be in line with the thinking here from Yoda. It's just like in sports. Let's say you're in the Super Bowl and you're about to catch a pass in the end zone, and if you do, then the clock will tick to 0 right after that, and and let's say that'll be a touchdown to win the game. But if you bobble it, maybe because you didn't quite practice enough, you lose the game, and you can't go to the official or go to the fans and say, well, don't I get some points for trying? That's just not how it works in the domain of sports. So we do care about consequences. They count for something. All right, this next case, we'll call it the Titanic case. So when I opened up this video, I said, if you had to choose between saving your own kid and saving 2 kids unrelated to you, what would you do? Most of us, of course, would save our own child. So that's what's going on in this scenario. So remember the Titanic. And actually, this has made headlines, and there have been memes about this of late, about this final scene in Titanic where the Rose character is on some driftwood or on, some kind of door from the Titanic, and poor Jack is in the freezing waters, and eventually he's going to die of hypothermia. And I remember when I first watched the movie, I was thinking, gosh, it kind of seems like there's enough room on that door for 2. What's going on here? And I think even the director, James Cameron, he's come up with some physics-based explanation for how no, that wasn't possible. But maybe should have made that door just a little bit more narrow for believability's sake. But in any case, set that Titanic finale aside. Suppose that you were on the Titanic and you are kind of in this position here, watching it go down, and you're waiting for rescue. And while you're waiting, you hear cries for help to your left. And you turn your head and, whoa, it's your own child that's drowning. And you're about to swim over and save them. But just before you do, to your right, you hear more cries for help. And you look over, and it's 2 children. They're not related to you. You've never seen them before, but they're clearly going to drown if you don't save them. Now, you only have time to go one of the two directions. So what would you do? Well, like I said, most of us would say, look, I don't want any child to drown, but I got to save my own kid. This is just kind of an evolutionary thing. This is just how we're hardwired. Now, if it were 2 versus 1 or even 1 versus 1, it seems like a pretty clear answer. But what a utilitarian will say is, well, what if I ratchet up the numbers? Instead of 2, make it 5, make it 10, make it 20, 50, 100, 1,000, 1,000,000, 1,000,000,000. At some point, it seems like we would have to sacrifice our own child because the number of children over here is just so large that it has to override our natural impulse. Now, when I ask students in my classroom, there's always one hand that will go up and they'll say, I don't care how many kids are over there, I'm saving my own kid. And part of me gets that. It's just kind of that innate drive. It's like it's probably the deepest drive in us. This is why our species is here, because we're pretty decent at surviving, and we also ensure that the next generation survives, in our own children. In the comments below, how many would it take? How many stranger children would it take for you to let your own child drown? Again, you might say, I'm going to be like a superhero and save all of them. Well, that might be how things play out in some versions of this hypothetical, but I'm not asking about those. I'm asking about this real possibility where there's not enough time to go both directions. Now, some of you might be saying, wait, how could there be 1,000,000 kids in the water over there? I don't know. This is it's a hypothetical. So as long as it's not breaking the rules of logic, it will fly. Are we allowed to be biased toward our loved ones? Our default answer is yes. But why is this story a challenge to the utilitarian? Because remember how we said everyone's happiness is weighted equally? And that's kind of one of the advantages of the theory. There's something beautiful. It doesn't matter if you're wealthy or you have a certain skin color or you're from a certain religion or a certain country. You are of no more moral worth than someone who's quite different from that. And there's something beautiful about that, right? That's kind of what America, I think, as a country, and other countries too, is striving for. That's sort of the dream. But that sentiment can also come back to bite us, and that's what's happening here. Is we don't want everyone's happiness to be weighted equally. First of all, we might want to weight our own happiness more than others, and then also that of our children. So what would the utilitarian say about this Titanic case? Well, if it's 2 versus 1, the utilitarian would probably say that you have to go with the 2. Because when you do the hedonic calculus, when you weigh all the pluses and minuses, the world, from a more objective perspective, not your perspective, would probably be better if we save the 2 children. Because if our own child dies, that's a big minus, and then we are devastated, so that's a minus. However, that would be offset by saving the 2 children over here, because both of their parents would be elated instead of devastated. So when you do the happiness math, it seems like 2 versus 1 is gonna beat saving our own kid. And even if it were 1 versus 1, utilitarian might have to just flip a coin. Now that seems ridiculous. So it's good to be unbiased and neutral and objective in our moral decision making, but do we have to take that to the nth degree? The utilitarian might, and that's why this might be a defect in its theory. We might need room in our moral theory for these special connections to our loved ones. Okay, let's go to the next case. We'll call this Rachel's Peeping Tom, because I'm borrowing it from a moral philosopher named James Rachels, who wrote a book for a lecture that would go with a lecture series just like this one. So essentially, this is a case of spying, but the twist is that the person spying, the peeper in this case, knows or pretty much knows that they're not going to get caught, meaning that the person being spied upon is never going to find out that they're being spied on. For utilitarian, that might justify the spying. So that adage, what so-and-so doesn't know can't hurt them, that also might ring true for a utilitarian. If there's no pain or suffering that manifests as a result of your action, then why say that that is immoral? Still, however, to many of us, there's still something icky about this spying. So there's a scene in the original Back to the Future where the lead character, Marty McFly, played by Michael J. Fox, he catches his father, George, in a tree with binoculars, spying on this teenage girl undressing. Now they're both like seniors in high school, and if they're supposed to fall in love, and have a family, so maybe that kind of makes this spying. The line is he's a peeping Tom. So if you don't know that slang, that's a term for someone who spies on someone. So he's spying on Lorraine getting dressed or undressed, and he falls out of the tree, and of course Marty pushes him out of the way, and then the father of Lorraine hits Marty with his car instead of George, and then brings him in because he gets knocked unconscious.
He's a peeping Tom. Dad!
Hey, wait a minute. Who are you? Stella! Another one of these damn kids jumped in front of my car! Come on out here, help me take him in the house!
And then the twist that makes this story very Oedipal and very Freudian. Marty McFly's mother falls in love with her son. That's why he's freaked out with the Calvin Klein, like purple underwear. And it's just, I think the movie is rated PG-13, maybe even PG. And there's some interesting themes going on in this movie, to put it mildly. But in any case, let's tweak this peeping story. Let's say that the person in the tree with the binoculars, they are like the ninja. They are like a professional at this, at spying on people getting dressed or undressed. They've gotten so good at it that they never get caught. So suppose the person never finds out that they're being spied on. I mean, take yourself. Today, yesterday, the day before, I'm sure you got dressed or undressed at some point. And what if I told you now that someone was watching you? You'd be like, oh my gosh, you would feel violated. But before I told you that, did you feel any pain or suffering? No. What you didn't know didn't hurt you. So do you see the dilemma here? There's still part of us when we go like, I don't know, there's still something wrong, still something icky. It seems like people have a right to privacy, and this violates that, even if no one ever finds out. So that's kind of the utilitarian critic's voice inside of us, kind of speaking up. But then the utilitarian would clap back and say, look, we all need to take a chill pill. No one finds out, then what's the big deal? Now, the utilitarian can factor in things that will happen down the road. So if this pattern of behavior gets worse and worse, and eventually spying isn't enough for this person, and, they need to do way more nefarious things, then the utilitarian has grounds for a moral judgment against the spy. But if that person brings out a crystal ball and says, look, I do this I, get my jollies off and no one else gets hurt. And you could show I'm going to live the rest of my life and then die and this never impacts anyone. Then the utilitarian might say, it's allowed. And if that doesn't sit well with you, then this is a good critique of our moral theory here. Is luxury a sin? So here we've got some images of celebrities who have spent a lot of money on cars. So a lot of celebrities, a lot of people are into cars. But just because you're into cars doesn't mean that you can afford to have a garage full of cars. Like someone like Jay Leno, he's notorious for being into cars, and he's got multiple garages full of hundreds of cars, and together they're worth millions of dollars. So one report I found says got over 130 cars. There were tens of millions of dollars, $50+ million. And what about spending an exorbitant amount on a single car? So here's Kim Kardashian. She's got a Rolls Royce that's estimated $400,000. And one of the most expensive cars ever purchased was by Jay-Z. So this is an $8 million Maybach Accelero. I don't even know if I'm saying that right. Apparently that car costs $8 million by some estimates. A utilitarian might say, this is so inefficient. Even though it's private property, it's your money, do with it what you will, right? There's some of that utilitarian might want to defend. If Jay-Z bought the Rolls Royce from Kim and then used the $7.5 million left over and then put that, to buy those rehydration salt tablet things that would go to save, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of kids, that would be morally preferable. And maybe even that should be morally required. Someone like Peter Singer might argue for that. So while, of course, we don't want morality to require everyone to be moral saints, that would be too burdensome. But at some point, when our spending becomes so out of this world, so exorbitant, so gratuitous, does it become immoral? At some point, does luxury become immoral? What do you think? So we don't have, many of us, I don't have that dilemma of deciding what I should do with millions and millions of dollars, because I don't have millions and millions of dollars, and probably most, if not all of you, don't either. So let's reframe the problem into economics that are at our level. How about just drinking expensive coffee house drinks? So you go to like a Starbucks or a Pete's or whatever your favorite cafe is to get coffee if you're a coffee drinker. How much do a lot of those drinks cost? Like $4, $5, $7. I mean, with inflation, things are getting crazy, right? Well, just like we might say to Jay-Z, hey, instead of $8 million, spend $500,000 and then use the savings for charity. Same thing here. Instead of spending $5 or $6 on a latte at, say, Starbucks, why don't you make the coffee at home and then use the savings, which would probably be, $4.50. Make coffee at home, especially once you adjust for the overhead costs of like you need a coffee machine and you need a house and water, blah, blah, blah. Well, after enough time, that will kind of level out, and it'll probably cost like a quarter or 50 cents or 75 cents to make. It won't taste exactly the same. It probably will have just as much caffeine, maybe even more. And then use the savings for charity, or even just give it to someone in your family. How about that? Someone in your community. That seems reasonable, and yet does it make morality too burdensome? So on the one hand, like I said, that sounds like, yeah, maybe if I was being moral, I would do that. I don't often do that, and so maybe I am falling short, morally speaking. On the other hand, if this charge is correct, that means pretty much everyone acts immorally all the time, because people make purchases like this pretty much every day. And does that mean that we are being immoral, that we are sinners over and over again? You know, like every person that goes into a coffee house and buys a latte or an espresso shot or just a regular house coffee, are we all just morally bankrupt? That seems a bit too strong. So this is a big dilemma. Now maybe there's a middle ground, right? Maybe it's, okay, you don't have to, it's okay to, from time to time, to spend $5 on yourself for a coffee drink. But if you do it every day, that might be too much. So we might look to Aristotle's Life of Balance. Maybe that's the answer here. That it's okay to splurge on ourselves, even pretty frequently, but eventually, if you have excess, you should pass it on, especially to those who need it the most, but at least to, I don't know, other people in your circle, your friends, your family, and your local community. Maybe that's the answer. That was a lot of fun. As always, thanks for hanging out with me.